Chapter 59. Dennis went to work as usual the next morning. The atmosphere around the particle accelerator installation was somewhat somber since the reported explosion a couple of months ago. On that day, the Admiral made it painfully clear that if Diana, Terry, or Dennis said anything about what really happened, they would be treated to a beautiful suite at Hotel Guantanamo. He even threatened bad things would happen to their respective families. As much as they wanted to tell Mickey about what really happened, they had kept their mouths shut. What ensured dour and emotionally overcast days lately was the Admiral, the killer of Jason Marsalis, in the eyes of Dennis, had actually set up an office at the Midway facility. As Dennis was traveling down the elevator to the underground level where his and Diana's offices were, he thought about how the whole Guantanamo thing never entered his mind the previous day. He was sure glad he had shown up at Jason and Mickey's home yesterday, and more than glad he got his buddy back. As he rode the elevator down to his office level, Dennis kept his hands in his pockets, and in the palm of each hand was a USB security key. Since the day of the explosion, Jose had been assigned to work with Dennis. Jose wasn't an engineer, but it was remarkable how intelligent he turned out to be. This was due to the capabilities afforded to individuals who wear an amulet, and since he had worn one when he first landed on the island, he had clarity of thought far above those around him. He ended up being Dennis's lab assistant since Dennis had a hunch it would come in handy to keep him near. Sure enough, today was going to be Jose's chance to come in handy. When he arrived at his office, Dennis saw Jose was already there and ready to start work. Dennis closed the door and came over to sit in a chair near Jose. "Hey, Joe, how you been?"
"I am well, Dennis. And you?"
"I'm good. Great, actually." Lowering his voice, Dennis asked, "Am I right in discerning you aren't a big fan of the Admiral?"
"You would be correct in that assumption. What he did to Mr. Marsalis was unethical, immoral, and depraved. I have nothing but disgust for him."
"I'm really glad you said that, Jose," said Dennis.
"Why would this be?"
asked Jose. Lowering his voice to nothing but a whisper, Dennis responded, "Because, my friend, Jason is alive, and he is sitting in his living room as we speak." Jose's eyes grew wide, and his mouth hung wide open. Nodding, Dennis added, "That's right. He's back, but he wants to get some evidence for what Kenji did to him. Would you be willing to create a diversion to keep Kenji out of the portal room while I carry out the plan?" Up to this point, Jose had been leaning forward to hear Dennis as he whispered. Jose now sat back in his chair and stared at Dennis for several moments. Glancing to some papers he had stacked on his desk in Dennis's office, Jose said in a normal volume,
"Dr. Green, I have these estimates on the systems tests you scheduled for next week, but I think I need to personally go over this schedule with the Admiral. Would you agree?"
Dennis smiled, stood up, and walked back over to his desk. "Yes, I agree. We need to make sure nothing happens here without the Admiral's approval."
"Very good, Dr. Green. When do you think I should go over these numbers with him?"
"Time is of the essence. Feel free to go see him now if you wish," replied Dennis, stifling a smile on his face.
"Very good, sir. I think I'll probably be with the Admiral for maybe 15 minutes?
asked Jose. "That sounds about right." Jose nodded his head, picked up the estimates sitting on the desk, and left the office. Dennis was on his heels until they got to the elevator. He took the elevator down to the level where the portal room was, and Jose proceeded on to the office where the Admiral had set up shop. As he neared the portal room, Dennis looked around to see if anybody could see where he was going. Once he was satisfied he was proceeding undetected, he swiftly entered the room. Getting to the control stations, he promptly inserted the 2 USB keys into their respective sockets and activated the portal systems. First, he sat at his normal console and took the necessary steps to spin up the cryogenics for the particle accelerator. Once that began, he sat at Jason's console to enter the specific coordinates for Jason's living room. Meanwhile, Jason, Mickey, Terry, Lynn, and Diana were all waiting in the living room for Dennis to arrive. As soon as the portal window formed, Dennis looked at his watch and stepped through at the exact time prearranged with Jason. Instantly transported to Jason's living room, his arrival served as notification that the portal window was now active. All 6 individuals stepped back through it and now stood in the portal room looking back at the scene of Jason and Mickey's living room. As soon as he arrived, Jason took his seat at his workstation, while Diana rushed to a filing cabinet in the back of the room where the video camera was kept. Hoping the camera was charged, she flipped the power switch and was more than gratified to see it power up, ready to record the evidence they needed. Mickey and Terry took places near the inward swinging door to the portal room, Mickey on the hinge side and Terry on the handle side. Their job was to watch for anybody coming. Jason quickly moved his fingers over the keyboard, and in no time at all, the portal window changed, so the scene was no longer of Mickey and Jason's living room, but rather the portal room itself. It was a little disconcerting to see themselves in real time, and the portal window showed an endless tunnel of reflections, as if 2 mirrors faced each other. Looking up at the portal window to verify it was showing what he expected, Jason started to adjust the T parameter, swiftly going back in time, but stopping at precisely the moment he stepped through the portal. Looking at Diana, Jason asked, "You ready?" 10-4, she replied. Holding the camera to her eye, Diana pressed the record button and began recording all that the portal showed. Jason clicked a button on his screen, and the scene in the portal began playing out the events of that day. It recorded Jason stepping through the portal and the conversation he had with the Galimarians. It then showed the reactions of his friends when Kenji reached over and coldly clicked off the portal, effectively marooning him. There were about 10 minutes of recorded video when all was said and done. Then Jason paused the portal timeline. Diana brought the camera over to Jason, and he extracted the memory card carrying the video. Inserting it into his workstation, Jason immediately extracted the recording, created an email to the president's private email account he'd been given by the president himself when he was at the White House, then pressed send. As soon as the email program reported it as being sent, all in the room breathed a sigh of relief. They looked around to each other and a lot of smiles were silently exchanged. Terry stepped forward and left Mickey near the door, keeping vigil for anybody coming. "Jason, now that we have what we came for, would you please do me a favor?" asked Terry. Jason smiled. "You want to see Krelon?" A little embarrassed, Terry said, "I know he doesn't know me from Adam or Eve, but I just want to see him." "Actually," revealed Jason, "if you remember, I had about a month to wait while we were preparing for Jose to land on the island. I ended up working with Krelon for quite a while." Terry's eyes went wide, and a look of shocked embarrassment came over her face. You didn't say anything about me, did you?" Laughing, Jason said, "Actually, I told him all about you. About how Lorana had chosen you to be Krelon's soulmate in my timeline, and how completely in love with him you are." "Oh my God," said Terry, turning several shades of red. Jason stepped out of his chair and took Terry by each shoulder, saying, "Terry." She looked into Jason's eyes. Krelon is very anxious to meet you. Terry's mouth opened to say words, but none were there. Her heart was beating fast, and eventually she was able to manage. He is? Yes. Would you like to meet him? Now? Asked Terry. Now, responded Jason. Terry's instant reaction was to look down at her apparel and flatten out whatever invisible wrinkles in the material she thought were there. Reaching up to her hair, she said, I don't know what if... Diana stepped over to Terry. Sweetheart, if he's your soulmate, then it wouldn't matter if you had a ring through your nose and greasy hair. But in this case, you're beautiful. He's gonna love you. Lynn came to her other side and said, Go get him, girl. She looked at Diana and Lynn for a few moments, then at Jason. Okay. Yes, I want to meet him. Jason smiled and took a seat at his workstation. I never actually went to the underwater habitat where they are sleeping, but I need to go wake them up now, anyway. I'll try to get the positioning right, but it might take a couple of tries. Wait a minute, said Diana. If you point this thing underwater, won't that flood the room here? Good question, but no, it won't, replied Jason. There are a lot of safety protocols built into the computer program Dennis and I created to run the portal. One of the things Dennis put in was, any time we connect to a new destination, we turn off the two-way transportation. Makes sense, said Diana. My blouse is dry clean only, you see. Very funny, said Dennis, chuckling. Within a few moments, the scene changed from the paused portal room scene, previously shown, to what looked like a mostly dark green window. Jason had been a little off in his guess as to where the underwater habitat was located. Within a couple of seconds, they were looking at a scene under the water, and the water was clear enough to see, in the far distance, a domed underwater city. It looked like it was about 200 meters away from the portal window. What am I looking at? Asked Diana. Without glancing up from his workstation, Jason answered, This is a little over 1,000 meters below the surface of the water. Normally the water down here would be completely dark, but as you can see, the habitat off in the distance is shedding enough light to illuminate this whole area. I'll just make a few calculations, then reprogram the location to where I want it to point next. This was the first time Mickey was able to see Jason in his element. She had seen him in many circumstances, but this was truly a first. As she looked on from her vantage point behind the door to the portal room, she appreciated this new dimension of her husband. As Mickey stared at her husband through rose-colored glasses, appreciating the amazing man he was, she didn't notice the Admiral approaching the door. As soon as he reached it, he swung open the door, causing an unseen Mickey to be pinned behind it. Stepping into the room, nobody noticed his arrival due to the noise of the control systems and liquid helium pumps operating all around. Not until, that is, he decided to speak.
You!
Looking up from his console, Jason's fingers froze. He was just about to enter the new coordinates, but the Admiral's arrival was his new focus. Jason stood and, with manly courage, addressed the man who had made himself such an arch-nemesis. That's right, Admiral. Contrary to your original desire, I'm not dead.
That's something that can be corrected,
said the Admiral, with a cold, detached expression on his face.
You have become an enemy of the state, and you will be stopped.
And who decided that? You? Said Jason. Admiral Brinstock took a couple of steps forward and stopped. Mickey began extricating herself from behind the door and looked over to Dennis, since she didn't have a line of sight to Jason. Dennis looked at Mickey as well, and, with an almost imperceptible shaking of his head, he indicated to her to stay put and not make her presence known. With venom in his voice and pointing his thumb at his chest, Kenji responded through clenched teeth.
I did.
Jason smiled, looked down at the floor, and took a couple of steps to the side. While his movement seemed casual, his real reason for doing so was to lay eyes on his wife behind the door. He wanted to visually see she was okay. "Well," said Jason, "the big bad wolf has come to blow down my house again, has he?" "Well, you're too late, Grandpa." Jason's eyes then narrowed. "I don't know what I did to tick you off, but one thing I know is you are a sad, old, power-hungry criminal who is going to pay for his crimes."
"Oh, is that so?" replied Kenji. "I suppose you and the rest of your little pigs here are going to stop me?"
"We already have, Admiral," said Jason with all the virulence and spite in his heart.
"I suppose you're referring to the little email you just sent?"
said Kenji. The countenance of all in the room fell when the Admiral mentioned the email. Simultaneously, they all asked the same unuttered question. How did he know about the email Jason had sent?
"I'm afraid your little attempt to make me look bad isn't going to make it out of the facility, you little leech,"
said Kenji.
"Fortunately, I put in place some new security protocols since you were here. Any time an email leaves the facility, it crosses my desk first. It's actually a good thing for the security of the country you sent that email. I wouldn't have known you were here if you hadn't. So, I have you to thank for alerting me to your presence. Your terrorist activities are going to stop here and now."
Jason instantly thought about it, silently berating himself for not thinking about the possibility Kenji would have bugged all the communications to and from the facility. "Terrorist!" yelled Terry. "Jason is a hero for saving the planet, you included." What she couldn't know was her voice was strangely similar to that of his dead ex-wife. Kenji swung his head to the left to the source of the outburst and was shocked to see an apparition. Standing there in her favorite dress was Mrs. Brinstock. The dress was terribly singed, and it appeared to be smoking. What was left of her hair was in disarray, and the right side of her face was burned. As Kenji looked at her, she asked, "What are you going to do?" Interpreting the question as an encouragement to seek revenge, he answered the hallucination. "Trust me, Judith, I will avenge your death." All sane individuals in the room were instantly put on edge by his statement. It was now obvious this man was dealing with some sort of psychotic break, and there was no telling what he would do. "It doesn't matter anyway," recovered Jason, trying to focus the attention on himself and not Terry. "I'm still here, so your little story about me dying in some accident is going to start raising a lot of uncomfortable questions, and you are the only one people are going to be looking at."
"That's only if you are there for them to see,"
replied the Admiral as he looked back at Jason. Right then, Kenji reached down to his right side and flicked the small strap normally closed over the back end of the Sig Sauer P229, always strapped to his side. The handgun was such a part of the Admiral's persona, it was something easy to ignore. But with the flick of the strap, it became suddenly obvious what he intended to do: remove the source of his downfall. Kenji extracted his sidearm, raised it slowly, and uttered the same words he said when marooning Jason on the island.
"What I do now, I do for the good of the country."
All in the room were far too away to reach the Admiral in time. All in the room, that is, except Mickey. As the old man raised the gun toward her husband, Mickey relived the events of the last 24 hours, all of them flashing before her eyes in an instant. She felt the happiness of having her husband back, and the overwhelming anger at Kenji for what he did to her and her family. She looked at Jason and relived the feelings of pride in who her husband had turned out to be, and the instant kinship she felt for all those in the portal room, with a distinct exception of the Admiral. There was only one thing to do. Lunging out from behind the door, Mickey reached for the gun in Kenji's hands. Unfortunately, Kenji had already pulled the trigger, so the firing pin began its unchangeable journey toward the bullet primer. Striking the percussion cap, the .40 caliber bullet fired, emerging from the barrel, traveling at over 200 meters per second. The shell would cover a mile in 5 seconds flat, so any movement on Jason's part would be meaningless. Fortunately, Mickey's thrust against Kenji's arm was just in time to cause the trajectory to miss her husband's head. The bullet whizzed past, only missing him by an inch. Jason could literally feel the wind of the shell passing him by. Dennis wasn't so blessed, though. He had been leaning against his workstation, his left hand resting on the lower cabinet. The same bullet that promised to kill Jason found Dennis's left hand, piercing it through and through. After penetrating the metal cabinet, it lodged itself in the circuitry of the cryogenics control systems. This caused the liquid helium pumps to lose power without waiting for the needed signals from Jason's station, indicating the particle stream had been shut down first. As a result, the superconductors no longer had their ever-renewing bath of super-cold liquid helium. Soon, they would begin warming and losing their ability to effectively guide the particle stream. Lynn had been standing near Dennis when he was shot. Fearing he had been mortally wounded, she reached out to catch him and help in any way. She was a Navy reservist, but any shred of respect for her superior officer in the room melted at that moment. Her first priority was to help Dennis, who she could now see needed assistance, but was going to be okay. Mickey's hit against the Admiral's hand had caused him to lose his grip on the gun, and it went flying through the air. Hitting the ground without accidentally firing, it went skittering across the floor until it solidly lodged itself deep underneath a cabinet bolted to the floor. When Mickey heard the gunfire, her heart sank, thinking she had been too late. She looked over to her husband, expecting to see him slumping to the floor. Seeing that Jason was okay, she temporarily lost her focus as she felt tremendous relief. At that same second, a stinging backhand from the Admiral connected with the side of her face. The strike from Kenji caused her entire body to spin around. She instantly saw stars and ended up flying off into the corner of the room near the door. "You're next!" screamed the incensed Admiral. Having a gun drawn on him had made Jason instantly fear for his life. But seeing Kenji strike Mickey like that flipped a switch in Jason. He went from fear to outrage in 0 seconds flat. It was that threshold a man sometimes crosses when he no longer cares if he personally feels any pain. It's the focus a man feels when his circuits of compassion seem to short out, and all he can think of is applying pain to his adversary. Jason wasn't the warrior type and had always lived a fairly tranquil life. He had never experienced this before, but seeing Mickey fly through the air like that caused Jason to have fire in his eyes. Lunging for the Admiral, Jason yelled, "Ah!" He only had enough time to turn his head to see Jason's fist as it connected with his face. Immediately, Kenji's body spun around and fell to the ground, breathing heavily while opening and closing his now throbbing hand Jason stood over the Admiral's body and said, "Not so big without your gun, are you?" The Admiral spit out a tooth which had been dislodged. Jason approached the disabled heap of a man spitting blood and reached down to deliver the coup de grace. Suddenly, the old disabled man showed himself to be not so disabled. Taking his own knee, Kenji struck out against Jason's knee. Fortunately, not only was Jason's leg already tensed, so the blow didn't cause any lasting damage, but it also missed his target. The hit definitely did come as a surprise, causing a tremendous amount of pain to the hero of the world. Calling out in pain, Jason crumbled to the floor, giving Kenji the time to stand again.
"What? You think an old man can't fight, you worm?"
said Kenji, blood dripping from his mouth.
"That's the problem with you brainiacs. You think you know everything. Well, tell me."
Kenji drew back his foot and solidly kicked Jason in the exact same spot he had previously hit him with his knee.
"Did you calculate that to happen?"
Jason cried out in pain, writhing on the floor. Diana, who this time had been silently standing near the portal, yelled out, "Don't!" Hearing a new voice and satisfied he had subdued Jason for the time being, the Admiral turned around to see where the voice had come from.
"And you! You're nothing but a sorry excuse for an administrator."
Stepping forward and coming near her, he added,
"I'm pretty sure you can't even add 2 and 2. I should have known better than to have a woman run this place."
Kenji continued berating Diana, telling her how she and all her terrorist cohorts in the room were going to be eliminated. Having seen what he did to Mickey and Jason, Diana began to fear for her life. She turned her head away from the Admiral, cringing as he spread his poison in her direction. At that very moment, the lights in the room went black. The only light entering the room was, oddly enough, the light coming from the alien habitat on the other side of the portal window, which had begun to destabilize. There were strange sounds similar to static electricity discharges coming from the portal aperture. The warming superconductors were losing their ability to control the particle stream in the accelerator, so the edges of the portal window were beginning to lose their focus. The entire scene would fluctuate and wink out, then back in. Jason, whose eyes had been closed due to the pain, opened them and saw the Admiral standing near to Diana, who was cowering. It was obvious Kenji was suffering from delusions, and that introduced an unpredictability in whatever he might do. Jason thought about how Kenji had threatened to kill the others in the room, including his wife, and was certain the Admiral would follow through with that threat. There was no reason to think he wouldn't. The Admiral had tried to kill him by marooning him in the past, and, when that didn't work, tried to kill him with a gunshot to the head. Jason thought about how his beautiful wife had saved his life, only to pay for it with a beating from Kenji. That thought steeled him for what he knew he had to do. While the Admiral was verbalizing his monologue on how worthless Diana was, Jason silently crept up behind him. As soon as he was close enough, he purposely made a sound while crouched near the ground, like he was still crippled from the pain. The Admiral turned and, seeing Jason crouching next to him, said,
"Oh, look here now. Are you back for another beating?"
Kenji raised his foot to kick Jason again, but, knowing that would happen, Jason yelled, "Nope." Reaching for Kenji's foot, Jason grabbed it and twisted as hard as he could. The Admiral wasn't expecting Jason's move, but his hand-to-hand combat training took over, and out of instinct, he did a tuck and roll away from him. Unfortunately for Kenji, this was the one time his survival instincts didn't serve him well. Because he was standing so near to the portal, the moment his shoulder touched the portal field, It surrounded his entire body, and Admiral Brinstock was instantly transported to a location over 1,000 meters under the sea, and 300 meters from the nearest underwater safe haven. It wouldn't have mattered if it was only 1 meter away, though. His body was instantly subjected to over 250,000 pounds per square foot of pressure, and within moments, all gases in his body collapsed. His body basically imploded. The last thing everyone in the portal room saw was Kenji's lifeless body floating away. At that moment, the portal window finally destabilized completely. The failsafes took over, and the particle streams were automatically shut down. In no time at all, the room went silent, and the lights turned back on. All eyes had been on the portal window witnessing the death of Kenji. But then, simultaneously, all wondered why the lights turned off and on at the perfect times. One and all turned and looked toward the door. Standing there, slightly nodding, with a look of resignation on his face, was Lieutenant Flume, Kenji's assistant. His hand was still on the light switch.
Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below, because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.